Here is a quick run through of the use of the ORION-CONVERT Adobe plugin. A good way of looking at how the conversions work is to actually look at the result on a linear ramp. So here I am in an SDR timeline with a clip interpreted as Rec 709, and that means that on a waveform it appears as a linear ramp. If I override the media color space and interpret that as HLG, now Adobe Premiere is applying a Rec 2100 HLG to Rec 709 conversion. Everything above the 75% HLG diffuse white is clipped here at the moment because tone mapping is set to none. But if I enable the auto tone mapping media, you get some basic controls. You can choose between types of tone mapping and you can adjust the overall exposure and highlight saturation, which obviously has no effect on a grey ramp, but you have no control over how the highlights roll off. So if we switch off auto tone mapping and make sure that is set to none, we can now enable an ORION-CONVERT conversion, which with override Adobe color management checked here will take over from the Adobe conversion and do initially exactly the same thing. We have the ORION-CONVERT conversion set to HLG to SDR, which is what's needed for this conversion, and we load the preset, for example, the NBC3 HLG to SDR preset, which now gives us some roll off here. NBC3 actually rolls off to 109%. So if perhaps we want to change that and make it roll off to 100%, we could set the knee here to perhaps 75%, the diffuse white level, and just increase the amount of compression there to take it nearer to 100%, and then maybe on the output, let's also change that, say, to 50%. And when it's set to 50%, putting the compression all the way on the output means everything is compressed to exactly 50% at the output level. But if I dial that back, I can set it so that 100% HLG maps to exactly 100% SDR. The balance between the input and output compression is something you need to play with yourself and see what the different effects of them are and the combination of the two to create the result you want. So I can save that as a preset. If I now go to this HLG timeline, notice here I've got my display color management disabled so that I'm just seeing the raw HLG pixel values here, because if I enable it, although it emulates the appearance of the image, it's unable on this SDR display to do anything above 100% and things start clipping. On my external SDI monitor, if it's set to HLG and the transmit output is set to HLG, I'm seeing the HLG correctly on there. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to turn off display color management just so that we can see the HLG pixel values unmodified on here. So in this HLG timeline, I have 3 clips shot of the same scene on the same camera in 3 different modes. This first clip is shot in HLG natural mode. The second clip is shot in HLG mild mode. And the third clip is shot in S-Log3 Rec 2020 mode, which you'll notice that Premiere Pro doesn't understand metadata for S-Log3 Rec 2020, so it thinks it's Rec 709, and I'm overriding and saying it is HLG in order to match the color space of the timeline, so Premiere does no conversion and I can do it entirely with an ORION-CONVERT conversion. So if I go to this first HLG natural clip, enable an ORION-CONVERT HLG to HLG conversion that initially does nothing, I could enable a look and load the mild HLG look. That will then exactly match this clip, which was genuinely shot at HLG mild. So I've turned an HLG natural into an HLG mild clip. Equally, if I turn that one off, enable ORION-CONVERT HLG to HLG on there, look, load look, mild HLG but set invert on, now that is undoing the mild HLG look and making that mild HLG clip exactly match the HLG natural clip. And this S-Log3 clip, in a similar way, I can set an S-Log3 Rec 2020 to HLG conversion. And again, because this was shot with S-Log3 live, if I load the live S-Log3 look and invert it, it's undoing that look while converting to HLG. I also know that this camera has a minus 0.7 stop offset between the HLG output and the S-Log3 output. So I type minus 0.7 into the log offset, and now we have 3 clips here: S-Log3 live, HLG mild, and HLG natural, that are all made to match using the ORION-CONVERT conversion. Now this clip here is a Rec 709 clip. So in this HLG timeline, with its media color space set to Rec 709, Premiere Pro is applying a Rec 709 to HLG conversion, but it is just fitting the Rec 709 into the first 75% of the HLG. There is nothing above HLG diffuse white. So I can use an ORION-CONVERT conversion on here, going SDR to HLG, but with some input and output expansion, lifting up those highlights to give them a bit of HDR range. So here, the plain Premiere conversion, and here's a boosted ORION-CONVERT conversion to create some HDR out of the SDR. And this last clip here is a Log-C3 clip, and again, because Premiere Pro doesn't understand Log-C3 as a source format and just thinks it's Rec 709, I am overriding the media color space to say it is HLG to match the timeline, so Premiere does no conversion to it. And I can do everything with ORION-CONVERT. So I enable an ORION-CONVERT conversion going Log-C3 to HLG. I've got a bit of input and output compression, and in fact on this one I'm using the log offset to control where the exposure of the Log-C3 image sits within the HLG. I also have a look enabled here, and I'm just dialing in a bit of extra contrast into the image. So now if this is a finished HLG edit, and as well as delivering HLG, perhaps I need to deliver an SDR version. So what I can do is take the HLG timeline and drop the whole thing into my SDR timeline. Premiere is automatically applying an HLG to Rec 709 conversion, but just clipping out the highlights because I have tone mapping set to none at the moment. So now, if I apply an ORION-CONVERT conversion to here, I can load from file the HLG to SDR conversion I created earlier, and that is now rolling off the highlights here into the SDR range. So I can produce an SDR deliverable from my HLG edit. Equally, I could take my HLG timeline if I required a PQ deliverable. Here is that HLG HDR edit cross-converted to PQ, and at the moment it's just doing a straight Premiere cross-conversion, which may be perfectly adequate for your needs. But if you like, you can apply an ORION-CONVERT setting going HLG to PQ, and you'll notice initially that is exactly the same as the built-in Premiere conversion. It does nothing, but I could perhaps apply some P3 limiting on there. In the case of this shot, it's not doing terribly much. There's not much that's outside the P3 gamut, but a few pixels that are outside P3 are being limited to that to produce a deliverable in PQ that is guaranteed constrained to the P3D65 gamut.